I was 67 years old when I watched my son David slap his mother across the face at our family dinner table, while his wife Sarah smiled and clapped like it was entertainment. The sound of that slap echoed through our dining room like a gunshot, but it was his words that truly broke my heart. "You need to learn your place, mother. Times have changed." They thought they had all the power, thought my wife's recent illness had made us weak and dependent on them. They had no idea that as I quietly stood up and made a single phone call, I was setting in motion events that would destroy their perfect life forever. But before we continue, if you've ever witnessed someone you love turn cruel, if you've ever felt that burning need to protect your family from harm, leave a like on this video and subscribe to hear what happens next. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story will show you exactly how karma works when you least expect it. My name is Robert Anderson, and I spent 40 years building a successful real estate empire from nothing, working my way up from maintenance man to CEO, all to give my son the privileged life I never had. My wife Margaret and I sacrificed everything to ensure David would never know hardship, but somewhere along the way he forgot the values we taught him. That evening, as I watched him tower over his mother with raised hands, I remembered something I had almost forgotten. A document hidden in my office safe that would soon remind my son that the comfortable life he used to threaten us had never actually belonged to him. He didn't know it yet, but his moment of cruelty was about to become his greatest regret. But to understand how we reached this moment of betrayal and revenge, we need to go back. Back to the day my son first brought home the woman who would turn him against his own parents. I started my real estate company with nothing but a borrowed toolbox and a job as a maintenance man in a rundown apartment building. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust became my constant companions as I learned every aspect of property management, fixing leaky faucets during the day and studying real estate law at night. Margaret, my wife, worked as a property manager in the same building, her gentle way with tenants teaching me that real estate wasn't just about buildings, but about the people who called them home. We lived in a tiny studio apartment back then, saving every spare dollar to buy our first property. Those were lean years, but they were filled with a special kind of joy that only comes from building something together. The business grew slowly but steadily, from managing single properties to developing entire communities, and finally to major commercial projects. Margaret had a way with investors, her warm smile and honest manner winning their trust while I handled the construction details. She taught David his first words sitting in model homes, her free hand drawing little houses on notepads to keep him quiet. One memory stands clearer than all others: David's 10th birthday when I first showed him a construction site. I can still see him standing there in his oversized hard hat, his eyes wide with wonder as I showed him how to read blueprints. Margaret had packed us lunch in a red cooler, and we sat on stacked lumber eating sandwiches while I explained how buildings rise from empty lots. "One day, son," I told him, "all of this will be yours." He hugged me so tight that day, his small arms barely reaching around my work jacket. That moment, that perfect moment of father and son sharing dreams under an open sky, became my compass for everything I built afterward. The company flourished over the next 3 decades, growing into Anderson Properties Group, one of Chicago's most respected developers. We moved from that tiny apartment to a beautiful mansion in Highland Park, sent David to the best schools, and built the kind of life I had only dreamed of as a young maintenance man. Margaret's illness came suddenly last year, a rare condition that left her partially paralyzed on her right side. She fought hard, her spirit strong even as her body weakened, but the doctors said she would need constant care. The house fell quieter, the family dinners became more subdued, and David, busy with his executive career, visited less and less. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger projects, expanding the company, trying to fill the emptiness with blueprints and contracts. But every night I came home to Margaret's brave smile, her determination to recover, her unwavering love for our family despite her condition. I kept everything running smoothly, as if maintaining our perfect life might somehow speed her healing. The business thrived, but success meant little compared to Margaret's health. David's occasional visits became our only real connection to normal family life, though even those felt increasingly rushed and obligatory. I told myself it was natural, that he was building his own career, that we needed to give him space to grow. I filled my days with work and my evenings caring for Margaret, finding a kind of peace in our quiet routines. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, David called with unexpected news. "Dad," he said, his voice unusually excited, "I met someone special. Her name is Sarah Winters. She's a corporate lawyer, and I really want you and Mom to meet her." Sarah Winters arrived at our home that evening wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than my first month's salary as a maintenance man. Her smile was practiced, perfect, the kind corporate lawyers use to close hostile takeovers. She brought an expensive bottle of wine and analyzed everything in our house with the precision of someone automatically calculating asset values. "What a magnificent estate," she said, her eyes scanning the high ceilings and marble floors. "It must be quite expensive to maintain, especially with Mrs. Anderson's medical needs." I noticed how she emphasized medical needs as if testing the waters. David watched her every move, hanging on her words like a teenager seeking approval. Margaret had prepared dinner from her wheelchair, insisting on maintaining some normalcy despite her condition. Sarah barely touched the food, making a show of complimenting Margaret's brave effort, in a tone that dripped with condescension. During dinner, Sarah asked questions that seemed innocent but left me deeply uncomfortable. "This property must require so much upkeep. Have you considered downsizing? A more manageable space might be better suited to your current situation." She let the sentence hang while David nodded along, as if discussing his mother's disability was perfectly normal dinner conversation. When I mentioned the company's latest projects, Sarah's eyes lit up with an intensity that didn't match her polite smile. "Real estate empires can be such burdens to manage, especially with health issues in the family," she mused, touching David's arm. "Sometimes it's better to let younger minds take control." I watched my son transform before my eyes, becoming someone I barely recognized. He interrupted Margaret when she tried to share family stories, saying, "Mom, no one wants to hear old tales. Your speech is still a bit slow anyway." The same son who had once proudly worn a hard hat now acted embarrassed by his mother's condition. After dessert, while I was helping Margaret with her medication, I overheard Sarah's whispered words to David, "Your parents clearly need professional care. This arrangement isn't sustainable." Something in her tone made my hands shake slightly as I measured out Margaret's pills. When they left that evening, Sarah hugged Margaret with theatrical warmth, her expensive perfume lingering in the air like a warning sign. "We should discuss care facilities soon," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I know some excellent places that specialize in long-term disability." David didn't notice how his mother flinched at those words, too busy gazing at Sarah with blind adoration. In the weeks that followed, I saw less and less of my son. When he did visit, Sarah was always with him, steering conversations toward estate planning and medical costs. She found subtle ways to make Margaret feel burdensome, using terms like quality of life and professional care, as if they were kind suggestions rather than cruel dismissals. David began canceling our regular family dinners, always with excuses about business meetings Sarah had planned. He stopped asking about his mother's therapy progress, instead forwarding brochures for nursing homes. One evening, as I sat beside Margaret's wheelchair looking at old photos of David learning to read blueprints, proud and eager to learn the family business, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something was changing, shifting beneath the surface like foundation cracks that appear slowly but threaten the entire structure. My son was slipping away, being reshaped by hands that seemed to have plans for more than just his heart. The first incident happened at Margaret's birthday celebration, a tradition we had maintained despite her condition. I had spent hours arranging her favorite flowers and preparing a small family dinner she could manage from her wheelchair. But when David and Sarah arrived, they brought glossy brochures instead of gifts. "Mom," David announced with forced patience, "we found the perfect nursing facility. Sarah's uncle owns it, very exclusive. You'll get professional care instead of burdening Dad." I watched Margaret's hands tremble in her lap as she tried to smile, telling myself they meant well, that maybe they were just concerned about our well-being. The second blow came during Margaret's physical therapy session at home. She had made remarkable progress, managing to stand for short periods with support. When David stopped by unexpectedly, I eagerly called him to witness his mother's achievement. "Dad," he said, rolling his eyes while Sarah texted on her phone, "this is embarrassing. Mom's barely moving. Stop pretending everything's fine." My hands shook as I helped Margaret back to her wheelchair, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. I forced myself to believe they were just being realistic, that we needed to accept our limitations, that their harsh words came from a place of concern. But seeing Margaret's determination dismissed like a child's foolish dream broke something inside me. The final cut went deepest, during what should have been a moment of celebration. Margaret had successfully walked 10 steps with her walker, a milestone her doctors had thought impossible. When I called David to share the news, I overheard his conversation with Sarah before he realized I was on the line. "Your mother's delusions of recovery are becoming a problem," she was saying. "She needs to accept reality and sign those care facility papers." David's response shattered my heart. "I know it's exhausting. Sometimes I wish they just accept they can't live independently anymore." I stood there holding the phone, each word feeling like a betrayal of every sacrifice we had made for him. That night, alone in our bedroom watching Margaret sleep, I pulled out old family albums. Images of a small boy looking at his mother with pure adoration, of a young man eager to make us proud, of precious moments shared between generations. When had that son disappeared? When had we become burdens instead of parents? I tried to rationalize their behavior, to find explanations that would hurt less than the truth. Maybe they were right about professional care. Maybe we were holding on to independence too tightly. Maybe love sometimes meant accepting help, even when that help felt like abandonment. But sitting there listening to Margaret's steady breathing, I finally admitted what I had been avoiding. I was losing my son. Not to natural concern or practical necessity, but to a calculated campaign of cruel manipulation disguised as care. The house felt colder than ever that night, filled with an emptiness that echoed with unspoken words and unanswered questions. The same home that had once bustled with family love now felt like a battlefield where we fought to maintain our dignity, each room a reminder of relationships that were fading like Margaret's strength, but not her spirit. The news came on a bright spring morning when David called, his voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in months. "Dad, we're having a special family dinner next weekend. Sarah's parents will be there, and we have important news to share." My heart leaped at the invitation, grateful for any chance to bring our family together again. Margaret's face lit up with hope, her first genuine smile in weeks. I immediately offered to host the dinner at our home, wanting to make it perfect for everyone. "That's thoughtful, Dad," David said, sounding almost like his old self. "We could use help with the catering and arrangements." I spent thousands on the finest catering service, even hired a nurse to help Margaret look her best for the evening. For the first time in months, I felt included, wanted part of their lives again. Margaret worked with her physical therapist extra hard that week, determined to sit properly at the dinner table without her wheelchair. The possibility of a happy family gathering filled us both with a hope we hadn't dared feel in a long time. But 3 days before the dinner, I overheard something that turned that hope to ice. I was at David's office to drop off some paperwork he had requested, when voices drifted through his partially open door. Sarah was speaking in low, excited tones. "Everything's arranged. The power of attorney papers will be ready to sign at dinner. Once they're declared incompetent, we can handle their estate properly." My hand froze on the doorknob as David replied, "Are you sure we shouldn't tell them beforehand? They're going to find out eventually." Sarah's laugh sent chills down my spine. "Tell them what? That we're using a family dinner to have them declared unfit? Your mother can barely speak clearly, and your father is obviously overwhelmed. Better to let them think it's just a nice evening. By the time they understand what they're signing, it'll be too late." My son's voice, hesitant but compliant. "I guess you're right. Mom's condition is getting worse and Dad's too stubborn to see reality. And the lawyers already think they're incapable of managing their affairs, thanks to your documentation." I backed away from the door, the papers falling from my trembling hands. The betrayal was so complete, so carefully planned, that my mind struggled to process it. They weren't just pushing us into a care facility, they were trying to take legal control of everything we had built. They had prepared lawyers, gathered false evidence, ensuring no one would question their authority to seize our lives. The weight of their betrayal pressed against my chest like a physical pain. That night, I barely slept, torn between confronting them and playing along to see how far their deception would go. I thought about Margaret, about how devastated she would be to learn our son thought her disabled mind was as damaged as her body. The next 2 days passed in a blur of painful clarity. I watched them make preparations, accepting deliveries, arranging furniture, all while maintaining their charade of a simple family dinner. Each time they mentioned the upcoming celebration, the lie felt like another knife in my heart. I could have exposed their plan, could have called it all off, but something deeper held me back. A cold, quiet voice inside me whispered that sometimes the best revenge is letting people think they've won, while silently preparing to show them exactly what they're about to lose. The morning of the dinner arrived bright and clear, as if nature itself was unaware of the betrayal about to unfold. I helped Margaret dress carefully in her favorite blue dress, knowing we would need to maintain the pretense until the last moment. As I adjusted her hair in the mirror, I caught sight of our reflection. A couple who had given everything to their family, only to be treated like incompetent burdens to be discarded. But behind the pain in our eyes, there was something else emerging. A steely resolve that would soon remind my son and his wife that appearances can be deceiving. I picked up my phone to text David that we were looking forward to dinner, playing one last time into their elaborate lie. The response came quickly, filled with fake warmth and poorly hidden anticipation. As I sat beside Margaret, holding her hand while we waited for evening to come, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over us. They thought this was the end of the story, their perfect plan executed flawlessly. They had no idea it was just the beginning. The dinner began precisely at 7 o'clock, our dining room filled with the soft glow of candlelight and the aroma of expensive catering. Sarah's parents sat across from us, their legal colleagues scattered among other guests, all watching Margaret with poorly concealed assessment as she carefully managed her silverware. I noticed how they documented every slight tremor of her hand, every pause in her speech, building their case for incompetence with each passing moment. The first strike came during the appetizer course. Margaret asked David about his recent business trip, her words slower but clear and thoughtful. Sarah interrupted with a loud sigh, "Mother, please don't strain yourself. We all know how difficult speaking is for you now." The room grew uncomfortably quiet as Margaret's face flushed with humiliation. Then David, our own son, added cruelly, "Maybe you should just focus on eating, Mom. Your coordination isn't what it used to be." I watched my wife's hands tremble as she tried to maintain her dignity, but worse was yet to come. As the main course was served, Sarah stood up, tapping her glass for attention. "Since we're all here, especially the lawyers, we have some important papers to discuss." She pulled out a thick folder, her smile predatory. "It's about ensuring proper care for both Robert and Margaret, given their declining conditions." Margaret looked at me, confusion and fear in her eyes, but before I could speak, David stood up. "Mom's disability has clearly affected Dad's judgment too. They need professional management of their affairs." The lawyers began nodding, pulling out documents, while Sarah's parents watched with satisfied smiles. Then it happened. Margaret, summoning all her strength, pushed herself to stand, gripping the table for support. "We are not incompetent," she declared, each word clear despite her effort. "We are still capable of." The sound of Sarah's mocking laughter cut through the air like a whip. "Oh, look at that. She can barely stand. This is exactly what we mean." Then David did something unforgivable. He walked over to his mother and forcefully pushed her back into her chair. "Sit down, Mom. You're embarrassing yourself." The slap echoed through the room before anyone realized what had happened. David had struck his own mother for daring to stand up to them. Sarah actually clapped, saying, "Finally." Someone needed to show her her place. The other guests froze in shock, wine glasses halfway to lips as the scene unfolded. Some looked away in embarrassment, others stared openly, but none stepped forward to defend us. I watched my wife's tears fall silently, a small trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth, while our son stood over her triumphantly. "Now," he said, "about those papers." That's when I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. Without a word, I took out my phone and dialed a number I had prepared for exactly this moment. "Yes," I said quietly into the phone. "Execute Protocol A, immediately." David's face changed instantly, a flicker of fear crossing his features as he recognized my tone. He knew that tone. It was the same one I used when closing major business deals. The same one that had built our empire. "Dad?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "What are you doing?" I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not my son but a stranger wearing his face. "Teaching you about consequences," I replied just as the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the now silent room like a death knell. In that moment, as David's face drained of color, something crystallized inside me. The forgiving father who had always made excuses for his son's behavior died in that dining room. In his place emerged someone colder, someone who finally understood that some betrayals can never be undone, some actions can never be forgiven. I helped Margaret to her feet, supporting her with gentle hands that contrasted sharply with our son's cruelty. As we walked toward the door together, leaving the stunned gathering behind, I felt the last door to reconciliation slam shut in my heart with the finality of a judge's gavel. I helped Margaret to bed that night, my hands gentle on her bruised face, my heart heavy with a pain I had never known existed. The silence in our bedroom felt different now, weighted with the memory of our son's cruelty. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, instead wandering into my home office like a ghost, touching the familiar furniture, wondering how our family had shattered so completely. In my distraction, I accidentally knocked over an old filing cabinet, sending papers scattering across the floor. That's when I found it, in a folder I had almost forgotten about. A thick manila envelope marked Family Trust Documents, in Margaret's precise handwriting from before her illness. Inside was a document that made my hands stop shaking and my mind snap into sharp focus. It was our family trust agreement, created 20 years ago when we first built our empire. The papers were printed on heavy legal stock, still crisp despite their age, with a gold notary seal gleaming in the corner. But what caught my eye was the special provision Margaret had insisted on including, a morality clause that could instantly disinherit any family member who committed acts of abuse against other trust beneficiaries. The clause was specific, detailed, and absolutely binding. My hand steadied as I read through the document, each page revealing more of the power I still held. The same son who had struck his mother, the same daughter-in-law who had mocked her disability, they had no idea that their actions had already triggered their own destruction. The trust controlled everything. David's house, his car, his executive position, even his bank accounts. All of it could be stripped away with a single signature. A cold clarity began replacing the numbness in my chest. I spread the papers across my desk, my mind suddenly sharp with purpose. The trust agreement, the morality clause, the witness statements from dinner, they weren't just papers anymore. They were weapons, perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. I thought of David's cruel smile as he struck Margaret, of Sarah's mocking laughter, of their calculated plan to declare us incompetent. They thought they had won, thought they had successfully painted us as weak and helpless. But they had forgotten who had built this empire, who had crafted its legal foundations, who had ensured that justice would always have the final word. I carefully returned the documents to the envelope, holding it with the reverence of a judge preparing to pass sentence. Tomorrow they would wake up believing they were still in control, still powerful, still untouchable. They had no idea that with one signature, one legal filing, I could turn their moment of cruelty into their complete destruction. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with possibilities and consequences. Margaret had given me one final gift, the power to protect her from those who thought her disability made her powerless. I placed the envelope in my safe, my movements deliberate and calm. The broken father who had watched his son strike his wife was gone. In his place stood a man with the legal right and moral authority to deliver a lesson they would never forget. The documents were simple pieces of paper, but in my hands, they had become something much more powerful. They were the scales of justice, and I was finally ready to make them balance. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I called Thomas Wheeler, my lawyer of 30 years and the man who had helped Margaret create our family trust. He answered on the first ring as if he had been expecting my call. "I heard about what happened at dinner," he said quietly. "The police report is already filed. I've been waiting to hear from you." We arranged to meet at his office immediately, in the same downtown building where we had signed the original trust documents. Tom's office hadn't changed in 3 decades. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs worn smooth with age, and walls lined with law books that had witnessed countless family dramas. I placed the manila envelope on his desk, watching as he examined each document with the methodical precision that had made him Chicago's most respected family lawyer. "Margaret was brilliant," he said, adjusting his reading glasses. "This morality clause is absolutely ironclad. The abuse trigger is clear and documented. The trust controls everything in David's life, and the police report of his assault on Margaret activates the disinheritance clause immediately. He loses everything, his house, his job, his accounts, all of it." He laid out the papers in precise rows on his desk, creating a battle plan of legal documents. "What's more," he continued, "since Sarah was an active participant in the abuse, encouraging and celebrating it, she's equally liable under the trust terms. Their attempt to have you declared incompetent backfires completely because the trust specifically protects against such hostile actions." I sat straighter in my chair as Tom outlined our strategy. First, we would file for immediate disinheritance and asset recovery. Simultaneously, we would submit the police report and dinner guest statements as evidence. The timing would be crucial. The papers would be delivered while they were still celebrating their imagined victory, ensuring their first morning after the assault would end with the realization that they had destroyed themselves. "They'll try to fight it," Tom warned, but his smile suggested he welcomed the challenge. "Sarah will probably claim the clause is excessive, the disinheritance too harsh, all sorts of legal maneuvers. But everything is in writing, every term clearly stated, every witness statement documented. They don't have a legal leg to stand on." He pulled out fresh forms, his pen hovering over the signature lines. "The only question is, Robert, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your relationship with David will never be the same." I thought about Margaret's bruised face, about Sarah's mocking laughter, about their cruel attempt to declare us incompetent. "The relationship is already gone, Tom. They killed it themselves. Now it's time for them to learn that actions have consequences." Tom nodded, understanding perfectly. He had seen enough family betrayals to know when reconciliation was impossible. We spent the next hour preparing everything. Disinheritance notices, asset recovery forms, legal declarations, all perfectly worded and absolutely binding. When I finally signed the last document, Tom gathered them with the satisfaction of a general whose army was perfectly positioned for battle. "I'll file these first thing tomorrow morning," he said. "They should receive the notices by courier within 3 days. Do you want me to handle all communication going forward?" I stood up, feeling taller than I had in months. "No, let them try to call me. Let them realize that the parents they thought were so weak, so easily dismissed, held the power to destroy their perfect life all along." Tom walked me to the door, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Margaret would be proud of you, Robert. Not for the revenge, but for finally standing up to protect her." I left his office that morning feeling something I hadn't experienced since finding those trust documents. A sense of complete control. The same son who had dared to strike his mother would soon learn that some actions cannot be undone. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. The father they had treated like an incompetent old man was about to become the most powerful force in their lives. And this time, there would be no negotiations, no second chances, no forgiveness. They had chosen their path. Now they would walk it all the way to its bitter end. The legal notices were delivered exactly 3 days after the dinner incident. Tom's courier service confirmed delivery to David's house at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning. I sat in my study, watching the clock and imagining the scene. Their peaceful breakfast interrupted. The thick legal envelope placed in their hands, Sarah's confident smile fading as she read the first page, David's face draining of color as he understood what the morality clause meant. The disinheritance notice was immediate and total, the asset recovery immediate, and the trust documents proved they had triggered their own destruction through their abusive actions. Their perfect life was about to crumble, one official paper at a time. The first call came within 20 minutes. I watched David's name flash on my phone screen but didn't answer. 10 more calls followed in rapid succession, then a flood of text messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Dad, there must be some mistake. Please call us back immediately. You can't do this to us." Sarah's number appeared next, then messages from her. "This is completely unreasonable. We can negotiate terms. You're ruining our lives over a simple family disagreement." I smiled at that last one, remembering how they had laughed while my wife bled. By noon, they had discovered their accounts were frozen. I knew this because Tom's office called to inform me they had demanded an immediate meeting. "Let them stew," I instructed. "Don't schedule anything for at least a week." More calls poured in throughout the day, from their banks, from David's office, from various family friends who had witnessed their cruelty and were now hearing the true story. Each message revealed the unraveling of their carefully constructed life. "Why didn't you tell us about the morality clause? We had no idea they were planning to declare you incompetent. How could David hit his own mother?" By evening, Sarah was sending emails threatening legal action, claiming the clause was unfair, demanding negotiations. Tom forwarded each one to me with simple notes: "No legal standing. Trust is ironclad. They have no case." I sat in my favorite chair, Margaret resting peacefully beside me, listening to my phone buzz with their increasing panic. The same people who had thought us too weak and disabled to manage our affairs were now discovering just how much power we still held. The final message came at midnight, a long text from David. "Dad, please. We can't lose everything. The house, the cars, my job. You can't destroy us like this." I read it several times, savoring each word. The son who had dared to strike his mother was now begging for mercy. The life they had used to threaten us would no longer be theirs. I turned off my phone, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and enjoyed the quiet of my victory. Tomorrow they would wake up to the reality that they controlled nothing. They would realize that every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every moment of abuse had been a nail in the coffin of their own future. But most importantly, they would learn that the parents they had dismissed as weak and incompetent had been strong enough to let them fall. After setting the legal wheels in motion, Margaret and I decided to disappear completely. I packed our essential belongings, arranged for her medical care, and booked a flight to our old vacation home in northern Michigan. The lakeside house where we had spent our happiest summers still stood, peaceful and accessible for Margaret's wheelchair, far from Chicago's chaos. Before leaving, I wrote a simple note and left it on our front door. "Gone to heal where love still means something. Don't bother looking. You'll find us when the bruises fade." I knew they would eventually come to our house, probably thinking they could manipulate us in person, but they would find only silence and that cryptic message. The drive to the airport felt like shedding an old skin, each mile taking us further from the betrayal and closer to something like freedom. The medical transport plane that flew us north carried just 4 passengers, reminding us of simpler times before abuse and cruel ambitions had poisoned our family bonds. The house appeared exactly as we remembered. Wide doorways perfect for Margaret's wheelchair, a wraparound porch facing the crystal-clear lake, and absolute silence except for nature's music. No cell phone signals reached this sanctuary, no urgent messages, no desperate pleas from a son who had forgotten how to be human. I unpacked our belongings, arranging everything for Margaret's comfort, making sure she could easily reach what she needed. The house's previous owner, an old doctor who had understood the value of accessibility, had installed support rails and gentle ramps that now seemed like a blessing. The familiar sight of Margaret smiling on the porch brought back memories of happier times, before illness and greed had tested our family's love. That first evening, I sat beside her wheelchair with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset paint the lake gold while she held my hand. The local nurse, Jenny, remembered us from years ago and asked no questions when she came to help with Margaret's care. She simply said, "Some folks come to the mountains to escape pain, others come to heal from it. Either way, the mountains keep their secrets." Her words captured perfectly what we were doing, healing together while our son learned the cost of cruelty. Each morning, I woke to help Margaret with her exercises, enjoying quiet meals together, finding joy in her small improvements. The simple routine felt like healing, each day washing away another layer of hurt. I thought about David and Sarah, imagining their increasing panic as they lost everything, their perfect life crumbling while we found peace in honest love. Sometimes, watching Margaret determinedly work through her therapy, I imagined how proud she would be when she could stand again, proving their mockery wrong. Jenny brought weekly supplies and newspapers without prying, though her eyes held knowing sympathy. "Your phone's been ringing at the store," she mentioned once. "Lots of messages from Chicago." I nodded, understanding that our disappearance was causing exactly the uncertainty we intended. While they faced the chaos of eviction notices, explaining to friends why they lost everything, dealing with the social embarrassment of their exposed abuse, we were finding a different kind of wealth in this simple house. My note about healing where love still means something had been more than a message. It was a declaration of independence from their world of cruelty. Here, surrounded by nature's peace and genuine care, we discovered that the best revenge wasn't in watching their destruction. It was in finding our healing while their carefully planned world crumbled into chaos. 3 weeks into our mountain retreat, Jenny brought more than just supplies. She carried a thick envelope from Tom Wheeler containing newspaper clippings and legal updates that painted a picture of David and Sarah's spectacular downfall. The disinheritance was proceeding exactly as planned, but its effects had rippled far beyond just losing their assets. The police report of David's assault on Margaret had become public, destroying their social standing overnight. Their perfect life was unraveling thread by thread. Tom's letter detailed their increasingly desperate legal maneuvers. Sarah had tried claiming the morality clause was unfair, attempted to challenge the trust's validity, even suggested that Margaret's condition made her an unreliable witness. Each attempt had been swiftly dismissed, with judges expressing clear disgust at their behavior. The society pages that had once featured their charity galas now carried daily updates about their disgrace. Their mansion had been repossessed, their luxury cars towed away, their bank accounts emptied by the trust's recovery provisions. Through it all, Margaret grew stronger in our peaceful sanctuary, her therapy showing real progress, proving their cruel assessments wrong. Jenny brought one final update as winter deepened. David and Sarah had been seen arguing violently in public, their relationship cracking under the pressure. Sarah blamed David for not checking the trust documents, while he accused her of pushing him to abuse his mother. Their marriage was imploding as spectacularly as their finances. The final blow came when Sarah's law firm terminated her partnership, citing the public assault scandal. The same woman who had mocked Margaret's disability now found herself powerless and unemployed. David's corporate connections abandoned him, his business reputation ruined by his documented abuse of his disabled mother. Their relationship began showing deeper cracks under the pressure. Tom reported overhearing Sarah blame David for not controlling his temper, while David accused her of destroying his relationship with his parents. The perfect couple who had once plotted to declare us incompetent now turned on each other, their unity crumbling like their empty bank accounts. Through it all, Margaret and I remained in our peaceful lakeside home, watching her grow stronger each day, letting karma do its work without our presence. Their world was burning, but we felt no need to watch the flames up close. Jenny brought one final piece of news as spring approached. Sarah had filed for divorce, unable to accept life without wealth and status. David had been seen sleeping in his car, all his properties seized by the trust's provisions. That evening, as I sat on our porch watching Margaret take her first unassisted steps in months, my old flip phone buzzed with a message. It was from David, the first direct communication I had received since disappearing. "Dad, I've lost everything. Sarah's leaving me. I'm sleeping in my car. Please, I need to talk to you and Mom. Tell me where you are." I held the phone, feeling its weight like the weight of all our family's broken trust, all our shattered bonds. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors of endings and beginnings, while my son's desperate words glowed in the growing darkness. After 6 weeks of silence, I finally agreed to meet David at a small diner just outside Chicago, the kind of simple place Sarah had once considered beneath her status. Margaret insisted on coming, her determination to face our son matching her improved strength. I arrived early, choosing a booth near the back where I could watch him enter. He appeared exactly at the arranged time, but he was barely recognizable as the arrogant man who had struck his mother at our dinner table. His expensive clothes were gone, replaced by wrinkled discount store items, his polished appearance now showing signs of living in his car. When he saw Margaret sitting tall in her wheelchair, her face strong and determined, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Mom," his voice cracked on that single word. I gestured for him to sit, maintaining the calm demeanor I had cultivated during our weeks of mountain peace. The waitress brought coffee, her presence creating a momentary buffer against the emotional storm about to break. David spoke first, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. "What I did was unforgivable. Hitting you, Mom. Mocking your condition. Letting Sarah manipulate me into hurting you both." He couldn't meet our eyes, staring instead at the Formica table where his fingers traced nervous patterns. "I'm sleeping in my car. Sarah's divorce lawyers are demanding money I don't have. Everyone who witnessed what I did that night has turned against me." Tears began rolling down his face, the first real emotion we'd seen from him in years. The trust, it took everything. But worse than losing the money and status, I lost my soul that night. I became a monster who could strike his own disabled mother. Margaret reached across the table with her stronger hand, not touching him, but showing him how much her condition had improved. "We watched you change," she said clearly, her speech now strong and steady. "We watched Sarah twist you into someone we didn't recognize." David flinched at her clear voice, remembering how he had mocked her slower speech. "I lost everything," he continued, his voice breaking. "The house, the cars, my job. But worse than that, I lost my parents. The people who gave me everything, who loved me unconditionally. I threw it all away because I was too weak to stand up to." He glanced at his bare ring finger, leaving the accusation unspoken. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face, highlighting every line of stress, every tear track, every sign of his downfall. "Mom, Dad," he pleaded, reaching across the table but stopping short of touching us. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can never undo what I did. But please, tell me there's some way to fix this. Some way to be your son again." The waitress returned, asking if we needed anything else. In that brief interruption, Margaret and I exchanged glances, our months of peaceful healing having strengthened not just her body but our unity. We studied him carefully. David, our only child, the boy we had raised with love and values, now broken by his own cruel choices. The same son who had laughed while his mother bled now sat before us, begging for a second chance he wasn't sure he deserved. The mountain air had taught us about silence, about letting moments stretch until their own weight revealed the truth. I took another slow sip of coffee, feeling his eyes on us, waiting for our response, understanding for the first time that he was no longer in control of anything, not even his own destiny. Margaret placed her steady hand on mine, and I placed my coffee cup down with deliberate slowness, the sound of porcelain meeting Formica cutting through the diner's quiet hum. "Forgiveness," I began, my voice firm and clear, "isn't like one of Sarah's legal contracts, David. You can't just sign papers and transfer trust. And our relationship isn't like your bank accounts, where you can declare bankruptcy and start fresh." He flinched at my words, but I continued without mercy. "If, and I emphasize if, we are to have any relationship moving forward, there will be non-negotiable conditions." I pulled out a small notebook where I had written our terms during our peaceful mountain mornings. "First, you will volunteer at the rehabilitation center where your mother does her therapy. You will help other disabled patients, learning the true meaning of dignity and respect. Every Sunday without fail." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. Second, all communication will be direct and honest. No more manipulation, no more cruel words, no more mockery of your mother's condition. One single moment of disrespect, no matter how small, and everything ends permanently. He started to speak, but Margaret raised her hand, silencing him. Third, you will attend anger management counseling and domestic violence prevention classes. You will learn why striking your mother was not just a moment of weakness, but a fundamental betrayal of everything we taught you. My son's hands trembled as he wiped his eyes, but he didn't argue. Fourth, family relationships will be earned, not demanded. Every visit, every dinner, every moment of connection must be preceded by demonstrated respect and genuine effort. Trust is rebuilt through actions, not words. I turned specifically to his empty ring finger. As for Sarah, her departure is probably the first honest thing that's happened in this situation. When she contacts you again, and she will when she needs money, remember this lesson. Love built on cruelty will always collapse. He nodded, unable to meet our gaze. Finally, Margaret concluded, her voice strong and clear, you will write a letter of apology to every person who witnessed your abuse. Not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge publicly the depth of your failure as a son. The diner had grown quieter, as if even the other patrons could feel the weight of this moment. David's voice came out barely above a whisper, I accept all conditions, Mom, Dad. Not because I have to, but because I need to learn how to be worthy of being your son again. We stood up slowly, Margaret now able to support herself with minimal help. The conditions start now, I said. We'll be watching, but from a distance. Prove to us that you understand the difference between having parents and deserving them. David remained seated, looking smaller than we had ever seen him, nodding in acceptance of his new reality. As I helped Margaret to her wheelchair, we heard him whisper, thank you for not throwing me away completely, even though I threw you away. We left him there in that booth, surrounded by the remnants of our coffee cups and the weight of his second chance, knowing that the path to redemption would be as hard as we had promised, but not impossible. Just very, very difficult, exactly as it needed to be. 1 year passed, marking each season with small steps toward healing. Sarah had disappeared completely, last heard of working at a small law firm in Seattle. David followed every condition we set with a dedication that surprised even our cautious hearts. He worked tirelessly at the rehabilitation center, learning genuine compassion from the patients he helped. Margaret's recovery exceeded all medical expectations, her determination matched by David's unwavering support during her therapy sessions. I watched from a distance as he rebuilt his life piece by piece, not with the arrogant speed of his previous existence, but with the careful patience of someone who had learned the true cost of cruelty. On Christmas Eve, we invited him to our home for the first time since that terrible dinner. He arrived early, carrying not demands or threats, but a handmade photo album documenting Margaret's recovery journey. His appearance had changed. Gone was the entitled businessman who could strike his mother, replaced by a humble man who now helped others learn to walk again. He had lost weight, gained wisdom lines around his eyes, and carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced his worst self and chosen to change. During dinner, he shared stories from the rehabilitation center, speaking with genuine warmth about the patients who had become his teachers in compassion and strength. One elderly stroke survivor had taught him about perseverance. Another had shown him the true meaning of dignity in the face of disability. Through their wisdom, David had found something he had lost long ago, the ability to see beyond physical limitations to the strength of the human spirit. The most touching moment came when he showed us the letters of apology he had written, each one documenting his journey from abuser to advocate. The pages were worn from being read at his anger management group, some stained with tears, others filled with painful self-reflection. He didn't show them to impress us but to share his growth, his understanding, his genuine remorse. As we sat in the living room after dinner, the same room where he had once plotted to declare us incompetent, I saw small but significant signs of change. He asked about Margaret's progress with real pride, celebrating each small victory. He spoke of his volunteer work with humility, grateful for the chance to make amends through service. When he mentioned Sarah's occasional attempts to contact him, there was no bitterness, only acceptance of lessons learned. Before leaving, he paused to hug Margaret gently, respecting her strength while acknowledging her vulnerability. I'll never forget what I did, he said softly. But I hope I'm becoming someone you can be proud of again. We watched him drive away in his modest car, feeling something we hadn't expected to feel again, cautious hope. Not the blind trust of before, but a measured acceptance that sometimes people can genuinely change when they're forced to face the truth about themselves. Looking back on this journey from our peaceful home, where Margaret now walks with only a slight limp, I've learned that betrayal and redemption follow the same rules as healing. The injury must be acknowledged, the treatment must be consistent, and sometimes the deepest wounds require the most difficult therapy. When our son struck his mother at that dinner table, while his wife clapped and laughed, they thought they were writing the final chapter of our story. Instead, they were only setting the stage for a lesson about love and consequences that would change all our lives. The trust that stripped away their power became more than just legal documents. It became a symbol of how quickly things can crumble when built on cruelty. Sarah's departure to Seattle and David's slow journey toward redemption taught me something profound. True strength isn't in the power to hurt others, but in the wisdom to know when to let people face the natural consequences of their choices. I didn't need to seek revenge, I just needed to stop protecting them from their own cruelty. Today, as I watch my son help others at the rehabilitation center with genuine compassion, I understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing someone to lose everything they gained through abuse. It's in that loss that they find their true character, their real values, and perhaps, their way back to becoming the person they were meant to be. If you're watching this and facing abuse in your own family, remember, forgiveness isn't weakness, but it must be earned through actions, not words. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone fall so they can learn to stand up with real dignity. Like and subscribe if this story touched your heart, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Let's build a community that understands the difference between enabling abuse and offering earned redemption. This is the Chronicler, reminding you that every story of betrayal can become a story of healing, but only if we're brave enough to let justice and wisdom guide our actions.